The stars whispered secrets of ancient civilizations, of empires that had risen and fallen long before the first human ever gazed up at the night sky. Across the galactic expanse, 1,000 species thrived, each with their own history, their own wars, and their own myths. Among them, one legend stood apart, a story passed down through the generations, whispered in darkened chambers and half-forgotten libraries. The humans. A race so destructive, so unrelenting in their conquests, that the elder species had purged all records of their existence. Some claimed they had wiped themselves out in an apocalyptic war. Others believed they had fled beyond the known galaxies, vanishing into the void. And yet, their memory remained, a ghostly warning of what unchecked ambition could unleash. For centuries, the stories faded into obscurity. The great empires dismissed them as mere fables, cautionary tales to frighten fledgling civilizations. After all, if such creatures had ever existed, they were long gone. Until the day the fleet arrived. The dominion of Vral had ruled uncontested for thousands of years. Their empire spanned hundreds of systems, their fleets unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of their rivals. When their deep space sensors picked up an anomaly on the fringes of their territory, they assumed it was some lost colony ship or a band of pirates foolish enough to test their might. They sent a single dreadnought, expecting a swift extermination. The crew of the Vrakash laughed when they saw the primitive vessels, ships of crude metal, shaped by brutal efficiency rather than elegance. They were old, relics of a forgotten era, their hulls scarred from countless battles. The Vryle hailed them with the arrogance of a species that had never known fear. The response came in a language the Dominion had long erased from their archives. "We are humanity. Surrender or be destroyed." The admiral of the Vrakash sneered. It was impossible. The humans were myths, extinct. Yet, as his sensors analyzed the approaching fleet, an uneasy feeling coiled in his gut. These ships, old as they were, moved with precision, their weapons charged, their formations flawless. He dismissed the fear. The Vraal had crushed countless foes before. With a single command, he ordered the annihilation of the human fleet. That was his last mistake. The human ships accelerated, faster than they had any right to. They weaved through incoming fire like wraiths, dodging plasma blasts with eerie precision. Their weapons, outdated by Dominion standards, should have been laughably ineffective, but they weren't. The first Vral ship went dark in seconds, its shields overloaded by a barrage of kinetic slugs. Another erupted in flames as a missile, ancient yet devastating, pierced its core. The dreadnought, the pride of the Dominion fleet, barely had time to send a distress signal before its bridge was torn apart by railgun fire. The battle lasted less than an hour. The humans didn't lose a single ship. Word spread like wildfire. The impossible had happened. The myths were real. The monsters had returned. And they were coming. The Dominion scrambled, sending more ships, larger fleets, entire armadas. It didn't matter. The humans fought like demons, with a brutality and cunning that defied logic. They used tactics the Dominion had never encountered, strategies born from a history of war unlike any other. They didn't seek diplomacy. They didn't ask for terms. They wanted revenge, for crimes forgotten by time, for the sins of the past, for the galaxy that had once tried to erase them. And so, as the stars burned and entire worlds trembled in fear, one message echoed across the cosmos, carried by the wreckage of every Dominion fleet that dared to stand against them. Humanity has returned. The Dominion of Vraal, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, now found themselves gripped by an unfamiliar and terrifying sensation. Fear. Reports poured in from every corner of their empire, each one worse than the last. Entire fleets had been wiped out, colonies reduced to ashes, and their once unchallenged dominion was crumbling under the relentless onslaught of an enemy they had long dismissed as a myth. At the heart of the dominion, Supreme Chancellor Vakos stood in his grand war chamber, surrounded by his highest-ranking commanders. Holograms flickered before them, each displaying the same grim reality. Human warships, striking like phantoms, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. "This is impossible," Admiral Toranek muttered, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "These creatures are relics of the past. Their technology is ancient, their ships crude. How are they winning?" Vakos turned to his intelligence officer, a pale-skinned Vraal named Sevalin, whose trembling hands betrayed her fear. "What do we know about them?" he demanded. Sevalin hesitated. "Not much. All records of the humans were purged long ago. What little remains suggests that they were resilient, warlike. But this?" She gestured at the destruction before them. "This is beyond anything we could have imagined." "Perhaps they were never truly gone," another general murmured. "Perhaps they have been waiting, watching, preparing for this very moment." The words sent a chill through the room. The idea that humanity had not vanished but had instead been lurking in the void, building their strength, was more terrifying than any war machine. "Enough speculation," Vakos snapped. "How do we stop them?" Silence, because no one had an answer. The war was unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. They had fought countless enemies before, rebellious planets, rival empires, pirate factions, but those foes had played by the same rules, following the same unspoken laws of engagement. The humans did not. They fought without honor, striking without warning. They refused to negotiate, refused to acknowledge surrender. They targeted the Dominion's supply lines, their shipyards, their fuel reserves. They were waging total war, something the Dominion had never encountered. And worst of all, they seemed to be getting stronger. The first human fleet had been small, but new warships were appearing every day. Where were they coming from? How had they built so many ships in secret? The Dominion's spies had no answers, and that only deepened the terror. And then, humanity did something truly horrifying. They took their first planet. The Dominion had assumed that humans were nothing more than raiders, striking quickly before vanishing. But when the industrial world of Chorus 9 fell, it became clear. Humanity wasn't just here for revenge. They were here to conquer. Survivors from the planet told stories of human soldiers unlike any the Dominion had seen. They fought in exosuits, moved like shadows, and never left a single Dominion soldier alive. The cities of Chorus 9 burned for weeks, and when the fires died, the human flag was raised over the ruins. A new empire was rising, and the galaxy would never be the same. Panic spread like wildfire through the Dominion. Chorus 9 was the first world to fall, but it would not be the last. Reports flooded in. Human fleets were striking deep into Dominion space, taking planets with terrifying efficiency. Worlds that had stood under the Dominion's rule for centuries now burned with human fire. Supreme Chancellor Vakos could no longer afford to ignore the truth. Humanity wasn't just winning, they were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. He called for an emergency meeting of the High Council, a gathering of the most powerful beings in the Empire. The council chamber, usually a place of control and order, was now filled with fear and desperation. "We must deploy our Omega-class warships," Admiral Toranek argued. "Their fleet is powerful, but they cannot match the raw might of our capital ships." "We've already sent Omega-class ships," Sevalin countered, her voice trembling. "They were destroyed." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room. "How?" Vakos growled. Sevalin took a deep breath. "We've underestimated them. Their ships may be old, But their technology has evolved in ways we never anticipated. Their weapons bypass our shielding systems. Their tactics are unlike anything we've faced. "What do they want?" one of the council members demanded. Svalin hesitated before responding. "Vengeance." Silence. Then the room erupted in shouts. "This is madness! We are the Dominion!" "Negotiate with them. Surely they can be reasoned with." "No, they will not stop until we are extinct." Vakos raised a hand, silencing them. His reptilian eyes gleamed with fury. "If it is vengeance they seek, then we will show them why the Dominion has ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years. We will burn their worlds, hunt them to the last soldier." But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. He knew the truth. The Dominion had always won because they had always been stronger. But for the first time, they were facing an enemy that was not afraid. For humanity, this war was not about conquest or power. It was something deeper, something more terrifying. It was personal. And deep in the void, beyond the reaches of known space, a new fleet was assembling. Humanity had returned. And they were just getting started. The Dominion's war machine roared to life. Across the Empire, shipyards worked without rest, churning out warships faster than ever before. Recruitment centers overflowed as soldiers were pressed into service, their minds filled with propaganda about the Terran invaders. The Dominion had faced rebellions, rogue fleets, and rival empires before, but never an enemy like this. And still, the humans advanced. The war was not fought on even terms. The Dominion believed in control, in discipline, in strategies that had worked for millennia. The humans fought with chaos, with unpredictability, with an unrelenting brutality that shattered every doctrine the Dominion had built its empire upon. A single human fleet could appear out of nowhere, hit a supply convoy, and disappear before the Dominion even had time to react. Their ships were not just fast, they moved like predators, striking vital targets with precision. They didn't waste time in drawn-out engagements. They struck where it hurt the most. And then came the ground war. When the Dominion lost Chorus 9, they assumed it was an anomaly. When they lost Kethros 6 and Draenor Prime in the same week, they realized it was a pattern. Human soldiers were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. The Vra'al, like many species in the galaxy, relied on advanced drones and automated warfare to minimize their own casualties. Their soldiers were commanders, guiding machines to fight on their behalf. But humans? They were different. They fought in the mud, in the ruins, in the streets. They didn't rely on machines to fight for them. They were the weapons. Dominion troops, accustomed to clean, calculated warfare, were horrified. Human soldiers did not break when outnumbered. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought with an intensity that defied reason, with tactics that made no sense, until they worked. The worst were the Terran shock troopers. They didn't just kill Dominion soldiers, they hunted them. They adapted, learned, and exploited weaknesses faster than any enemy the Dominion had faced. A single Dominion battalion could be wiped out in a night by a handful of human operatives. Their weapons, primitive by Dominion standards, fired kinetic projectiles that tore through armor like paper. They fought without mercy, and that terrified the Dominion more than anything. The humans weren't just conquering planets, they were taking them back. The Dominion's leadership scrambled to understand why. They were the dominant force in the galaxy. They had ruled unchallenged for centuries. What had they done to deserve this war? Then they found the truth. Deep in the restricted archives of the Dominion, buried under centuries of classified information, Supreme Chancellor Vakos uncovered a dark secret. The humans had not vanished from history. They had been erased. Long ago, before the Dominion had risen to power, their ancestors had encountered humanity. A young, ambitious race, expanding rapidly, forging alliances, and mastering warfare faster than any species before them. They were a threat, not because they were evil, but because they were relentless. And so the Dominion's forebears had made a decision. They had committed genocide. They had exterminated entire human worlds, burned colonies to the ground, and wiped every record of their existence. They had hunted the survivors to the edges of the galaxy, believing they had destroyed them all. But they hadn't. Somehow, humanity had survived. And now, after centuries in the shadows, they had returned. Not as conquerors, but as executioners. The realization struck Supreme Chancellor Vakos like a death knell. The war wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. The humans weren't here to expand, to conquer, or to dominate. They were here to settle an ancient debt, one written in blood and fire, one that the Dominion had forgotten, but humanity had never forgiven. Vakos stood in the silent chamber, staring at the ancient records, at the holovids of burning human cities, at the cold, calculated extermination of an entire species. The faces of the Vral leaders from centuries past looked down at him, their decisions sealing the fate of their descendants. The humans had every right to hate them. And yet, hate wasn't the word for what the humans felt. Hate was emotional. Hate could be reasoned with. This was something else. This was retribution. A sudden chime broke the heavy silence. An emergency transmission flickered to life in the war chamber. The face of Admiral Toranek appeared, his expression a mask of disbelief and barely restrained panic. "They're here," he said, voice hollow. Vakos straightened. "Where?" Toranek swallowed. "Here, on Vraal Prime." A hush fell over the room. Impossible. The humans were still on the outer colonies. They shouldn't have been able to reach the Dominion's capital so quickly. But they had. A second alarm blared. Tactical maps filled the war chamber, showing red markers descending from the void, like vengeful wraiths. Human warships, larger and deadlier than the Dominion had anticipated, had bypassed the outer defenses completely. They weren't here to fight another battle. They were here to end the war. The skies over Vraal Prime turned to fire as the first human dropships descended through the atmosphere. Anti-air defenses roared to life, but it was already too late. The humans had planned this assault with the precision of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. Stealthcraft had already infiltrated the planet's orbital stations, taking control of defense platforms and turning them against their own fleet. Dominion warships were exploding in low orbit, raining molten debris onto their own cities. On the ground, panic erupted. Citizens flooded the streets, watching in horror as their once invincible empire collapsed before their eyes. The Dominion's own soldiers, those who had been raised to believe in their species' superiority, now trembled as human strike teams emerged from the smoke. They fought like demons. The Dominion had never seen warfare like this. Relentless, brutal, efficient. Humans didn't waste time with theatrics. They struck vital infrastructure first, crippling power grids, communications, and military coordination. Within hours, entire districts were plunged into darkness. Vakos stood in his war room, watching the nightmare unfold. His admirals screamed at one another, issuing desperate, conflicting orders. It didn't matter. The Dominion was losing. No, humanity had already won. He had one last option. "Prepare the planetary annihilation protocol," he said, his voice calm. The room froze. Even his most loyal generals recoiled. "Chancellor," Savalan whispered, "that will kill billions, our own people." "If we cannot have this world, neither will they," Vakos said coldly. But before the order could be given, the doors to the war chamber burst open. A figure stepped inside, flanked by two human soldiers clad in jet-black armor. Vakos recognized him instantly. He had seen the man's face before. Not in person, but in the old, buried archives. One of the last survivors. A descendant of the massacred race. A human. The man walked forward, his helmet under one arm, his eyes filled with something worse than hatred. Certainty. Vakos clenched his jaw. "What do you want?" The human smiled. "Justice." Outside, the Dominion burned. Vrael Prime fell in a single night. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip, its fleets unmatched, its power unquestioned. But in the end, none of that mattered. Humanity had not come as conquerors or diplomats. They had come as executioners, delivering a long-overdue sentence. The war did not end with negotiations or peace treaties. It ended with silence. By dawn, the Dominion's high command was gone. Supreme Chancellor Vakos, his admirals, his war ministers, all executed. The humans did not spare them, did not offer mercy, did not waste words. The judgment had been passed centuries ago. This was merely the sentence being carried out. The streets of Vrael Prime were eerily quiet after the final battle. The towering spires of the Dominion's once great capital stood in ruin, smoke rising from shattered buildings. The banners of the Vrael, once a symbol of power, lay trampled in the dirt. And over the tallest tower, the flag of humanity flew. Across the galaxy, every Dominion-controlled planet received the same transmission. A human commander stood before the camera, clad in dark, battle-worn armor. His face was calm, his voice steady. There was no joy in his words, only finality. "The Dominion is no more," he said. "Your leaders are dead, your fleets are gone, your empire has fallen." A heavy pause. "For centuries you ruled through fear. You erased our history, you tried to erase us, and yet here we stand." He leaned forward, his gaze burning into the lens. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. But we do understand justice. The screen flickered, showing images of surrendered Dominion soldiers being led away in chains. The humans had not wiped them out, not completely. Those who had not resisted, those who had no hand in the genocide, would be spared. But they would never rule again. "We do not seek to replace you," the commander continued. "We are not here to build an empire. We have reclaimed what was stolen from us, nothing more. The galaxy is free from Dominion tyranny. What happens next is up to you." The transmission ended, and with it, an era. The Dominion's collapse sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Worlds that had been under its rule for centuries found themselves free for the first time. Some rejoiced, others fell into chaos. Rival species scrambled to fill the power vacuum, but none dared to challenge the humans. Because now, the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity had survived extinction. The alien vessel drifted in the cold void, its scanners pulsing as they bathed the human warship in waves of probing energy. The crew of the Vrothian scout ship had been monitoring the humans for decades, watching their chaotic wars, their reckless expansion, their stubborn refusal to submit to the galactic order. They had seen the primitive weapons humans once wielded, ballistic projectiles, crude energy beams, and nuclear warheads that barely scratched the surface of what true galactic powers could command. They had always dismissed humanity as a savage species, too emotional and too impulsive to ever become a real threat. But as their scanners returned data from the human warship before them, terror gripped the Vrothian crew. "Hi, Captain," one of the bridge officers choked, his crest of spines flattening in alarm. "You need to see this." High Captain Zalvorth stepped forward, his yellow eyes narrowing as he examined the results. What he saw sent a chill through his bones. The human ship, designation Indomitable, was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just a vessel, it was a fortress, a weaponized monstrosity that defied every known principle of war. Its hull wasn't made of standard metals, but a composite layered with exotic materials designed to absorb and dissipate energy attacks. The armor was thick, absurdly so, suggesting the humans had built it to withstand a siege of unimaginable proportions. And the weapons. Zalvorth's throat tightened as he read through the analysis. The Indomitable bristled with a terrifying array of weaponry, railguns capable of firing projectiles at relativistic speeds, plasma lances that could shear through the strongest warship hulls in seconds. And then there were the missiles, thousands of them, each equipped with warheads that didn't merely explode, but warped space itself, collapsing shields and armor as if they were paper. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the true horror was in the ship's secondary systems. The humans had created weapons that weren't just meant to destroy ships, but to hunt the crews inside them. Boarding drones outfitted with monomolecular blades and viral hacking protocols. Nanite swarms designed to dissolve flesh and metal alike. And worst of all, something called the exotroopers, cybernetic monstrosities engineered from fallen human soldiers, their bodies augmented with enough firepower to level entire cities. The Vrothian officer turned, his skin pale. This isn't a warship, High Captain. It's a nightmare given form. Zalvorth couldn't look away. The humans had always fought like cornered beasts, using whatever means necessary to survive. They had no limits, no restraint. And now, they had built a war machine that reflected that monstrous nature in full. A sickening realization hit him. The Galactic Union had long debated whether to bring humanity into the fold or eradicate them before they became a true problem. Many had dismissed them as unworthy of attention. That was a mistake. The humans had been preparing for war, and now they were ready. Zalvorth swallowed hard and issued a single command to his crew. Cut the scanners, power down all weapons, send a message to the home world. What should we say? The officer asked. Zalvorth exhaled shakily. Tell them, we must never provoke the humans. Silence fell over the bridge of the Vrothian scout ship as High Captain Zalvorth stared at the monstrosity before them. The Indomitable hung in the void, utterly still, as if it were waiting, watching. His crew obeyed his command without question, shutting down their weapons and ceasing all scans. But it was too late. The human warship had noticed them. A ripple of energy shimmered across its hull, and before Zalvorth could react, a transmission cut through their comms. The voice that spoke was cold, mechanical, yet unmistakably human. Unidentified vessel. You have been scanning a Terran warship. State your purpose immediately. The bridge crew tensed. Vrothian ships were equipped with stealth fields designed to mask their presence. No species had ever detected them before. But the humans had. And they weren't pleased. Zalvorth's mind raced. If they responded incorrectly, this ship, this thing, would obliterate them in an instant. He had no doubt about that now. He took a deep breath, forcing his spines to lie flat, and motioned to his communications officer. Open a channel. Do not, under any circumstances, show hostility. A click echoed as the channel opened, and Zalvorth spoke. This is High Captain Zalvorth of the Vrothian Exploration Fleet. We mean no harm. We were merely observing. A long pause. Then the voice returned. Observing, huh? The tone was laced with something unfamiliar. Mockery. Let me guess. You thought we wouldn't notice? Thought your fancy cloaking tech made you invisible? Zalvorth felt a pit form in his stomach. The humans had seen right through them. That was not our intention, he lied smoothly. We have been monitoring many civilizations across the sector. Yours is simply of interest to us." Another silence. Then something changed on their sensors. The Indomitable was powering up. Its engines flared with unnatural intensity, its weapons systems cycling through readiness checks. A targeting system locked onto their vessel. Not one, but dozens. The Vrothian ship was suddenly bathed in overlapping firing solutions, each one predicting their every possible movement. If the humans decided to fire, there would be no escape. Then the voice returned. "I suggest you pick another civilization to spy on." A warning. But beneath it, an unspoken threat. Zalvorth clenched his jaw. He had underestimated the humans. The entire Galactic Union had. These creatures weren't just another fledgling race climbing the ladder of progress. They were already at the top, and they were letting him go. "Understood," Zalvorth said carefully. "We will depart immediately." A long pause. Then, at last, the human's voice softened, just slightly. "Good choice. Now run along, little scout. And next time, remember who owns this sector?" The transmission cut. Zalvorth wasted no time. "Get us out of here, now." The Vrothian ship spun away, activating its jump drive, vanishing into the void. As the stars streaked past them, Zalvorth allowed himself a slow, shuddering breath. Humanity wasn't just dangerous. They were something else entirely. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Vrothian scout ship emerged from the jump, light years away from the terrifying presence of the Indomitable. High Captain Zalvorth had expected to feel relief upon their escape, but the sensation never came. Instead, a sickening weight settled in his chest. His claws drummed against the armrest of his command chair as he turned to his communications officer. "Send an encrypted transmission to High Command. They must hear of this immediately." The officer hesitated. "Captain, what do we tell them?" Zalvorth exhaled slowly. "The truth. The humans are not what we thought they were." The transmission took only moments to encode and send, and then all they could do was wait. The bridge crew remained tense, their eyes flickering toward the sensor readouts every few minutes, as if expecting the Indomitable to somehow appear behind them. Zalvorth couldn't blame them. It was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission. The Galactic Union had dismissed humanity as a lower-tier civilization, one with potential, but ultimately insignificant. Aggressive, yes. Dangerous, perhaps. But nothing that the greater empires couldn't handle if the need ever arose. They had been wrong. Horribly, horribly wrong. Minutes stretched into hours before the reply from High Command arrived. When it did, Zalvorth almost wished it hadn't. The message was direct. "You are ordered to report to the War Council immediately. Cease all further missions. The humans must be re-evaluated." Zalvorth felt his blood turn cold. The War Council? Only existential threats were brought before the War Council. The last time they had convened in full force was during the rise of the Ulthar Hive, a parasitic species that had consumed entire star systems before being purged from the galaxy. And now, humanity was being placed in the same category. Zalvorth turned to his crew. "Prepare for another jump. We return home at once." As the ship powered up, he allowed himself one final glance at the void beyond the viewport. For centuries, the Vrothians had believed themselves masters of strategy, warriors of supreme intelligence. But for the first time in his life, Zalvorth felt like a prey animal, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that humanity had become the apex predator of the galaxy. The worst part? They hadn't even begun to show their true strength yet. The Vrothian capital world, Zaltorath, gleamed beneath the twin suns as High Captain Zalvorth's scout ship descended towards the military command complex. Towering spires of obsidian and steel loomed over the landing bay, their surfaces adorned with the banners of the War Council, a symbol of order, strategy, and absolute power. Normally, such an audience would be granted only to the highest-ranking warlords of the Vrothian Dominion. The fact that he, a mere scout commander, had been summoned to stand before them meant only one thing: fear. The War Council was afraid. Zalvorth stepped off his ship, his boots clicking against the polished onyx floor. He marched through the corridor, flanked by honor guards, until he reached the towering doors of the council chamber. As they swung open, he was greeted by the sight of the 13 warlords who governed the Dominion. At the center of the chamber sat Grand Warlord Torval, his battle-scarred face carved from centuries of conflict. His piercing golden eyes locked onto Zalvorth, and the room fell silent. "You have seen something," Torval said, his voice a low growl. "Something that has shaken even you." Zalvorth stepped forward, his claws clenched behind his back to steady himself. "I have, Grand Warlord, and I bring grave news." He activated a holoprojector, displaying the terrifying scans of the Indomitable. As the data scrolled across the Council's vision, a ripple of unease spread through the chamber. "This is a human warship," Zalvorth said, "a single vessel. And yet it possesses armor that absorbs energy attacks, kinetic weaponry capable of bypassing standard shielding, and boarding technology that eliminates enemy crews before a ship is even destroyed." A murmur of disbelief ran through the council. Torval leaned forward. "You suggest that a single human warship rivals one of our own dreadnoughts?" Zalvorth met his gaze. "No, Grand Warlord. I suggest that it surpasses them." The silence was deafening. Finally, Warlord Vekthar, known for his brutal campaigns against lesser species, scoffed. "Absurd! Humanity is young. Their technology is crude. Even if they have improved, they lack the strategy to pose a true threat." Zalvorth turned his gaze toward him. "Then tell me, Warlord, how did they detect us through our stealth fields? How did they lock weapons on our vessel before we even realized they were watching?" Vekthar faltered. Zalvorth continued. "They did not fire upon us. They allowed us to leave. And do you know what that tells me?" Torval's expression darkened. "That they are not simply warlike savages." Zalvorth nodded. "Yes. The humans are not just strong. They are confident. They knew they could destroy us, yet chose not to. That restraint is what makes them terrifying, because it means they are waiting for something. Preparing for something." A long silence stretched across the chamber. Then, for the first time in Vrothian history, a War Council session ended without an immediate resolution. There were no orders to mobilize fleets, no calls for war, because for the first time, the Dominion had encountered an enemy it did not know how to defeat. And worse still, the humans already knew. The War Council chambers emptied slowly, but the unease lingered like the scent of blood after battle. High Captain Zalvorth remained standing before the massive war table, his claws resting against the cool surface. Grand Warlord Torval had not spoken since the discussion ended, his golden eyes fixed on the glowing hologram of the Indomitable. Finally, he exhaled through flared nostrils. "You believe they are preparing for war?" Zalvorth straightened. "I believe they are preparing for something far worse." Torval's gaze shifted, sharp as a blade. "Explain." Zalvorth stepped forward, tapping a command into the projector. The image shifted, displaying the Indomitable's power core, the eerie fluctuations of its energy output resembling something unnatural. "This ship was not just built for war," Zalvorth said carefully. "It was built for survival. The armor plating suggests they expect overwhelming firepower to be used against them. The redundant power systems, the sheer volume of kinetic weapons, every design choice points to one terrifying possibility." Torval's voice lowered. They are preparing to fight an enemy greater than us. Zalvorth nodded slowly. Yes, and whatever that enemy is, the humans are designing their ships to withstand it. Torval remained silent, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he turned to the warlords still present. Begin deep intelligence sweeps of all human territories. I want every intercepted transmission, every military movement analyzed. He fixed Zalvorth with a piercing look. And you, I am assigning you a new task. Zalvorth's spines stiffened. Whatever is required, Grand Warlord. Torval leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. I need you to find out what they are afraid of. Deep within human-controlled space, aboard the Indomitable, Captain Elias Grant stood in his command chamber, watching the sensor logs from their recent encounter with the Vrothian scout ship. His officers had been uneasy, wondering why they had let the alien vessel go. Grant knew why. He folded his arms as he studied the data, eyes narrowing on the final energy scans of the Vrothian ship before its retreat. They're starting to ask questions, his first officer murmured. Grant nodded. Let them. The officer hesitated. Do you think they suspect? Grant let out a slow breath, glancing at the sealed, classified reports on his screen. The ones detailing the real threat. The ones that had been hidden from the rest of the galaxy for centuries. He looked back at the viewport, staring into the endless void. They'll find out soon enough. Zalvorth sat alone in his personal chamber, aboard the Vrothian dreadnought Sovereign Wrath, staring at the encrypted data feeds scrolling before him. The War Council had given him full access to all intelligence reports on humanity, and what he saw unsettled him more than anything in his long military career. The humans were hiding something. Over the past 50 years, their technological progress had accelerated at an unnatural rate. They had gone from crude planetary defenses to warships capable of outmaneuvering the best the Galactic Union had to offer. Their ships were designed for endurance, their weapons refined for maximum lethality. But none of that was what disturbed him most. No, the real anomaly was the lack of outward expansion. Every major spacefaring race followed the same pattern: expand, claim new territory, secure resources, and then push outward again. It was the nature of all species that sought dominance over the stars. But the humans, they weren't expanding. Their fleet numbers were increasing at an alarming rate, yet their borders remained almost unchanged. They fortified their colonies, built orbital defenses, created fleet yards capable of churning out warships at a pace that defied known logistics. But they did not invade. They did not conquer. They were waiting. Zalvorth tapped his claws against the console. If the humans were preparing for war, it should be against the Vrothians, or one of the other dominant species of the Galactic Union. But if they had no interest in attacking their neighbors, then who? His console pinged. A classified transmission from the Vrothian intelligence network. Zalvorth frowned and opened the file. A moment later, his blood ran cold. It was a deep space scan taken in a sector far beyond human-controlled space, a region that had been marked as uninhabited for millennia. But it was no longer empty. The images showed wreckage. Not human, not Vrothian, not of any known species. Gigantic hull fragments, the remains of ships larger than anything recorded in history. Their design was completely alien. Angular, twisted, with strange patterns of damage that suggested their destruction was not from conventional weaponry. Something had torn these ships apart, and that was not the most disturbing part. Among the wreckage, faint energy signatures flickered. Active signals, weak but unmistakable. Whatever had destroyed those ships was still out there, and the humans already knew. Zalvorth clenched his fists. The Indomitable wasn't built for war against the Galactic Union. It was built to fight them. and for the first time, he understood why the humans had let him go. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't intimidation, it was a warning. The question now was, had the warning come too late? Zalvorth felt his stomach tighten as he scrolled through the intelligence files, his claws tapping anxiously against the console. The wreckage field wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard. An ancient war had been fought out there, far beyond known space, and something had survived. The humans knew. They had always known. He exhaled slowly, trying to suppress the primal fear curling in his gut. He needed confirmation. He needed proof. And that meant one thing. He had to speak to the humans. Deep inside human space, aboard the warship Indomitable, Captain Elias Grant stood in the dim glow of the bridge, watching the tactical display. His officers moved efficiently around him, monitoring ship diagnostics and sensor feeds, but his attention remained locked on one particular anomaly. A lone Vrothian vessel had entered human space. No escort, no weapons primed, no signs of aggression. "Brave," his first officer muttered, arms crossed. "Or desperate." Grant smirked. "Maybe both." He leaned forward. "Open a channel." A moment later, the view screen flickered to life, and Zalvorth's hardened visage appeared. His reptilian features were tense, his yellow eyes flickering with something Grant rarely saw in Vrothians: uncertainty. "Captain Grant," Zalvorth began, his voice measured. "We need to talk." Grant tilted his head. "Do we?" Zalvorth didn't flinch. "I have seen the wreckage. I know what you're building your ships for. I know there is something out there." His claws tapped against his console. "And I know you've been hiding it from the rest of the galaxy." The bridge went silent. Grant let out a slow breath, rubbing his jaw. Then he motioned for his officers to mute outgoing audio. "Well," his first officer whispered, "there goes the secret." Grant nodded, eyes narrowing at the screen. The Vrothians were smart, but he hadn't expected them to figure it out this quickly. It complicated things. The truth was, humanity hadn't just found the wreckage. They had encountered the things that caused it. And they knew that sooner or later, the war that had destroyed those ancient ships would come knocking at their door. Humanity's rapid militarization, their reluctance to expand, the relentless production of warships like the Indomitable, it was all preparation. They weren't interested in galactic conquest. They weren't trying to dominate the known species. They were trying to survive. Grant unmuted the channel and met Zalvorth's gaze. "You want answers," he said. "Fine. But once I tell you the truth, there's no going back." Zalvorth's expression didn't waver. "I understand." Grant exhaled. "All right then. Let me tell you about the things in the dark." Grant stood in the dim glow of his command chamber, staring at the encrypted files on his terminal. The classified reports contained data that no species outside of humanity had ever seen. Until now. Zalvorth sat across from him, his reptilian features impassive, but Grant could see the tension in his posture. The Vrothian had spent his life believing his people were the apex predators of the galaxy. That illusion was about to be shattered. Grant leaned forward, fingers interlocked. "We first picked up strange signals near the edges of explored space about 80 years ago. At first, we thought they were just stellar anomalies, background noise, but then ships started disappearing." Zalvorth's eyes narrowed. "Pirates?" Grant shook his head. "That's what we thought, until we found the wrecks." He tapped the console, and the holoprojector flickered to life. Distorted images appeared, twisted metal, shattered hulls, enormous scars along the remains of ships that had been torn apart by something. Some of the damage looked like energy weapon fire, but much of it didn't. Some ships had been peeled open like fruit. Others had been ripped apart on a molecular level. Zalvorth's spines flattened. This was not war. This was extermination. Grant nodded. We sent scout teams to investigate. The first few never came back. His expression darkened. The ones that did weren't the same. The images shifted again, this time showing something worse. Footage from the helmets of exploration teams. The camera feeds were shaky, flickering, but the sounds were unmistakable. Screams, gunfire. And then, just before the feed cut, an inhuman shriek that sent ice crawling up Zalvorth's spine. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grant exhaled. "At first, we thought it was an old war, some long-dead civilization that wiped itself out. But then—" He hesitated. "Then they woke up." The footage changed again, showing a grainy, long-distance recording. A human patrol fleet had encountered something moving through the debris field. At first it seemed like just another derelict ship, floating lifelessly in the void. Until it moved. Zalvorth's claws tightened as he watched. The derelict was enormous. A ship larger than any dreadnought he had ever seen, covered in jagged, shifting plates of some organic metal hybrid. It pulsed like a living thing, and as the human ships approached, the entire structure unfolded. Dozens of appendages extended, some bristling with weaponry, others ending in grotesque, claw-like structures. The footage zoomed in on one of the hull breaches, and Zalvorth felt genuine horror as he saw them. Figures. Twisted, elongated forms that used to be something else. Some bore remnants of armor plating from unknown civilizations. Others still had tattered uniforms, trophies of species that had been assimilated. Then the attack began. The recording dissolved into chaos. The human fleet opened fire, but the thing, the entity, moved like nothing Zalvorth had ever seen. It adapted. Energy beams bent away from its surface. Kinetic rounds dissolved before impact. And when it struck back, the human ships didn't just explode. They withered, their hulls corroding in an instant, their crews screaming as the very air inside their vessels turned against them. The recording cut. Silence filled the room. Zalvorth's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "You survived." Grant leaned back. "Barely." He rubbed his temples. "That was the first encounter. We lost an entire fleet just trying to escape." He glanced at the Vrothian. "We call them the Erebus. We don't know if that's their real name. Hell, we don't know if they even have names." Zalvorth exhaled shakily. "And you've been fighting them ever since?" Grant nodded. "Not just fighting, preparing." His jaw tightened. "We don't know how many of them are out there. We don't know if they have a homeworld or if they just exist, drifting through the void, consuming everything in their path. But we do know one thing." He locked eyes with Zalvorth. "They're coming." Zalvorth sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling from the horrors he had just witnessed. The Erebus. A name that meant nothing, yet carried the weight of something ancient, something unstoppable. He had spent his life believing the Vrothian dominion was the pinnacle of galactic power, that they dictated the fate of lesser species. Now, he realized how blind they had been, and how utterly unprepared. The room remained eerily quiet, save for the hum of the Indomitable's systems. Captain Grant watched him carefully, gauging his reaction. Finally, Zalvorth found his voice. "You should have told the Galactic Union." His words were slow, deliberate. They needed to know. Grant let out a dry chuckle. "And what would they have done, Captain?" "Dismissed us? Called us paranoid? Told us we were fear-mongering?" He leaned forward, his blue eyes cold. "Or worse, they would have panicked." Zalvorth opened his mouth to argue, but Grant was right. The Galactic Union was bloated, slow-moving. Every major decision required centuries of deliberation, endless political maneuvering. If the humans had revealed the Erebus threat too soon, the Union would have either ignored them or thrown fleets at the unknown enemy without understanding what they were fighting. Both outcomes would have led to disaster. Zalvorth exhaled sharply. So instead, you prepared in secret. Grant nodded. We built warships like the Indomitable. We stopped expanding and started fortifying. Every new colony was another fortress, every outpost a forward defense station. His expression darkened. Because we don't know when the Erebus will arrive in full force. Only that they will. Zalvorth's claws curled against the table. The Vrothians prided themselves on their military superiority, but against this enemy, against an intelligence that adapted in real time, that absorbed the biology and technology of everything it consumed, they wouldn't last a month. None of them would. A chilling thought crossed his mind. Have the Erebus reached your inner worlds yet? Grant's silence was answer enough. Zalvorth felt his blood run cold. How long do you have? Grant exhaled, rubbing his temples. If our projections are right? His voice was quiet. Maybe a decade, maybe less. A decade. 10 years before the sky burned. Zalvorth straightened, his mind already racing. If he returned to the Dominion with this knowledge, the War Council would listen. They had to. If they didn't, they would be signing their own extinction. But that wouldn't be enough. The Dominion alone could not stop this. The Galactic Union had to be warned. Every species, every fleet, every soldier had to prepare. He met Grant's gaze. You let me leave before, Captain. That was a warning, a show of power. He inhaled deeply. Now I'm asking you to let me leave again, but this time so I can fight. Grant studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then you better move fast, Captain, he said, because time is running out. As the Vrothian ship left human space, Zalvorth sat in his command chair, staring out at the void. He had come seeking intelligence. He had found a nightmare. And now the greatest war in history was about to begin. Not between empires, not between species, but between life and the thing that had come to erase it. Zalvorth's ship tore through the void, heading straight for the heart of the Vrothian Dominion. He had no time to waste. Every second spent debating, every moment of hesitation, brought the Erebus closer to the inevitable slaughter. He had to make the War Council understand, had to make them believe. But even as the stars streaked past his viewport, doubt gnawed at him. Would they listen? Would the Dominion, proud and arrogant, accept that they were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy? That the war they had spent centuries preparing for, the war against humans, was meaningless in the face of the true enemy? He clenched his jaw. It didn't matter. If they didn't believe him, he would make them believe, because the alternative was unthinkable. 1 week later, Vrothian War Council Chamber's Zalvorth stood before the gathered warlords, his claws pressed against the cold metal war table. The chamber was filled with tension, the air thick with skepticism. Grand Warlord Torval sat in silence, golden eyes scanning the intelligence reports that Zalvorth had presented. The other warlords muttered amongst themselves, uneasy but unconvinced. Finally, Vekthar, the most aggressive of the council, snorted. "This is madness," he growled. "You expect us to believe that humans have been fighting a war in the dark? That some unknown force lurks beyond our borders, ready to consume the galaxy?" His spines bristled. "Humans lie, Zalvorth. They deceive. This is a ploy to make us afraid." Zalvorth's patience snapped. He slammed his fist against the war table, baring his fangs. You think I'm afraid of humans? His voice was a snarl. I saw what they saw. I heard the screams. I watched as ships were torn apart like dry leaves, their crews devoured by something we don't even understand. He pointed at the hollow projection still flickering in the center of the chamber. Look at it, look at it. That is not a human deception. That is death itself. Silence fell. Torval leaned forward, his expression unreadable. And you trust the humans? Zalvorth hesitated. I trust that they want to live, and right now, that is all that matters. Torval sat back, considering. Finally, he let out a slow breath. You have given us much to think about, High Captain. He glanced around the chamber. The Council will deliberate. Zalvorth cut him off. There is no time for deliberation. The chamber went still. Zalvorth's voice lowered. This enemy does not negotiate. It does not scheme. It does not play political games. He met the Grand Warlord's gaze. It consumes, and once it arrives, there will be no second chances. Torval studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood. I will summon the full might of the Dominion, he declared. His gaze swept across the gathered warlords. And then we will bring this to the Galactic Union. If the humans speak the truth, then we all stand on the precipice of annihilation. His voice hardened, and we will not die in silence. Zalvorth exhaled, tension finally leaving his body. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a start. 5 years later, high orbit of Vrothian Prime. The combined armada of the Galactic Union hung in formation, stretching across the void. Thousands of ships from dozens of species, Vrothians, humans, Zorathi, Telnari, each with their own rivalries, their own histories of conflict. And yet, for the first time in history, they stood together. The Indomitable rested at the heart of the fleet, now one of many such warships. The humans had shared their knowledge, their technology. The Dominion had adapted their tactics. The Union had built defenses unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But would it be enough? On the bridge of his new command ship, Zalvorth stood side by side with Captain Grant, staring out at the black abyss beyond their fleet. Grant's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the edge in his tone. They're coming. Zalvorth nodded. Then we will meet them. A long silence stretched between them. Then the stars shifted. A ripple of unnatural darkness spread across the void, and suddenly the shadows moved. Ships, things emerged from the nothingness, twisting and pulsing, their forms both organic and mechanical, their hulls adorned with the skeletal remains of past victims. The Erebus had arrived, and the war for the galaxy had begun.